The United States hit yet another very grim milestone in the COVID-19 pandemic this week, with 663,000 American deaths, which now means 1 out of every 500 people in the United States have died from COVID-19. 1 out of every 500 people in this country have died of COVID-19. This is a tragedy at this point that is largely preventable. And that's what drives me so crazy about this, and that's what makes it even sadder. We have people dying because of misinformation here in the United States. We have people out there who are still denying that the pandemic is even real. They don't believe this is actually a thing that's happening. And then they go to the hospital with COVID-19, get put on a ventilator, and some of them still won't acknowledge that it's real. In the early days of the pandemic, I remember sitting right here and saying, everybody calm down. Yes, listen to medical experts, but let's not lose our heads. And this was in the very, very early days of it. It didn't take long for me to admit that, wow, yeah, I was wrong. This is the real deal. And a lot of other people who had been saying similar things in the very early days of it, they came around as well and said, nope, this is real. We need the mask. We need the precautions. We need to do all of these things. But somehow some people never snapped out of that. When they saw family members die, when they saw friends and coworkers die, they still refuse to believe this is real. They try to write it off saying, oh, well, this person had a comorbidity. Oh, they were 250 pounds, they were a diabetic, they had heart problems, they were an asthmatic, whatever it is, they're trying to justify in their own minds why it can't happen to them. And that's the problem. This selfish way of thinking that we seem to have way too much of here in the United States, the it can't happen to me, I'm immune mentality, is what is driving people to an early grave. Are you more likely to die from it if you have a comorbidity? Absolutely. Do you have to have a comorbidity in order to die from it? Absolutely not. And ordinarily, you would still keep living even if you were overweight, even if you had heart problems or asthma. You wouldn't have died had you not got the COVID-19, and people have to understand that. 1 in 500 people in this country are now dead in just a year and a half because of this virus. And we're still sitting here watching as numbers continue to climb. We're watching more cases. 153,000 new cases the other day, Tuesday, I think. 153,000 new cases in the United States. This is not going away. This is not getting better. The share of people who say they will never get vaccinated is dropping, so that's a positive, but that's about the only positive we have right now. People need to get vaccinated if they can. People need to be wearing masks. You still need to be socially distancing. You need to avoid large gatherings. All those rules from the early days of the pandemic that people seem to have thrown by the wayside, believe it or not, folks, we have to get back to that because the death this is causing simply isn't worth it. But unfortunately, not enough people in this country apparently feel that way.
A little more than a century ago, an influenza pandemic ravaged America.
There were 4 waves of the 1918-1919 pandemic. The 2 greatest occurred in the fall of 1918 and the winter of 1919.
Dr. Howard Markel has studied epidemics in American history.
This was an era where there were no medications, there were no vaccines for influenza. We didn't even know it was caused by a virus.
Best projections, 675,000 people died. Fast forward to today, a grim milestone. Deaths from the coronavirus pandemic have surpassed that figure. More than 675,000 people have now died of COVID-19 in the United States.
Just sadness because it didn't have to be this high.
It is true that back in 1918, the population was a third of what it is today. But that entire population was at the mercy of the pandemic. because there were no vaccines. But today, a different problem in the United States, a reluctance to use the vaccines, the very tool our ancestors wish they had had.
It's the unvaccinated that are driving this present surge that's resulting in many hospitalizations, need for intensive care unit, and also the record number of deaths that we're seeing.
We have had some capacity open up, and it is not because these patients are miraculously getting better and going home. It's because they're dying.
Federal health officials now say we're in a pandemic of the unvaccinated.
When 99% of the people who are dying of COVID today don't have a vaccine, that's perfect proof that you need to be vaccinated.
It all raises an uncomfortable question. What are we willing to accept when it comes to deaths? This is the death toll over time so far. 1,000 in March of 2020, 300,000 by the end of last year, twice that many by this summer. Some now ask, could there be 1 million tragic deaths before this is all over?
I certainly hope not. I hope not. I don't believe at all that is something that is an inevitability by any means. If we get the overwhelming proportion of our population vaccinated, we're not going to see that at all.
But that means getting most of some 70 million eligible adults vaccinated, an effort that's been poisoned by politics and misinformation, the worst it has been in 100 years.
It's never been this level of anger and politicization and distrust.
2021 isn't 1918. They lack the science to prevent 675,000 deaths, whereas we, to a great extent, have lacked the will. Dr. Sanjay Gupta, CNN.